Constructing your life is about much more than just building a bank account. Each week, join real estate entrepreneur and mindset coach Austin Linney as he interviews guests who are constructing their dream lives and impacting the world around them on a daily basis. If you're an entrepreneur or wanting to start a business, or you just want to hear motivating stories of how others have overcome the odds, you are in the right place. And now for your host, Austin Linney.
Guys, welcome back to Construct Your Life. This is Austin Linney here. I have the honor of having Mr. Andres here. How are you doing, my good sir?
Austin Linney, my man. I'm doing great, buddy. How are you?
Guys, this is going to be an amazing episode. We've known each other for north of 15 years. We've worked together for years. I've watched him grow, watched his family grow. He does some big things these days, but that's not where he started. So we're going to talk about you can start it, maybe talk about where we started and then go from there.
That's a good place to start. So where do we start?
Cheesecake Factory, right?
I try to forget.
No, I do forget. Cheesecake Factory, right?
Yeah, so, I'll take a step back because I think it's important for people to know a little bit of your, everyone's beginnings. And so I'm from Venezuela. So I was born and raised there, came to Austin, pursuing a lot of goals and big dreams. Actually came here with one suitcase. Most of the stuff in that suitcase is completely gone. I think I kept books and notes and stuff like that. So that just comes to show that material things don't matter, right? And believe it or not, before Cheesecake Factory, that was my second job here. I actually got a job at McDonald's. So that was my first job in the U.S. And I needed a job, and my roommate was actually a manager there. And I just basically took the job. I was like a teller or just cashier and stuff like that. And then I was like, this sucks. I was making $6, $7 an hour. And I was like, I could work extra hours. It just wasn't cutting it. So Cheesecake Factory was opening up, and I think I applied to be a server. And they actually said, well, you don't have experience. You have a funny accent. They didn't say that, but they kind of implied it. So you could either be a dishwasher or you can be a busboy, which is the guy who cleans the tables. And I was like, I'll get back to you. So my goal for the job was I always saw that servers kind of had the upside, you get extra tips. If you have good service, you'll be the one that always gets more than the 20% or 18% that people kind of aim for. And I wanted flexibility. As you know, I used to play music, and I wanted to have my weekends off or be able to switch whenever I had a gig. So I took the busboy route. I was like, well, I still get those two things. I get flexibility, and I still get if I'm really good at it, maybe I get more tips. And I think he paid for maybe $4 an hour. I don't know. You might remember that too. It was $3 an hour. And I was actually doing that for several years. It took a management change and someone pushing for me, and he was like, you know what, you actually could be a server here. I'm like, duh, that's why I applied for it. And that's how we started. That's how we met. I think you skipped the first few years of that piece. So I want to make sure people remember that.
Yeah. No, it's better because, it's funny. I look back at that job and I've been hired leaving that job because I work there. And so from an outside looking in, people might say, oh, it's just the Cheesecake Factory. They're known for cheese. But I will tell you verbatim, that was the hardest training I've ever been through in my life. The test to be a server was 250 questions, visual test. And so anytime I went to a job interview after that, they're like, oh, you worked at Cheesecake Factory, you got the job. So be careful the way you view the job, because it could be a stepping stone to a bigger one. And
not only that, I think it also speaks about just don't think about where you start. Think about what you're really trying to accomplish. Think about the big goals. I could have just taken the dishwasher job paid 4 times more than the busboy job. But the busboy job, you actually could get more tips, right? It was $3 an hour versus $12 an hour, right? But one, you're fixed, right? If I needed more money, I could have just gotten a second job. But then on the other one, I'm like, well, maybe I could get more upside. If it's a good night, maybe I'll get more tips. If I bad night, I'll get less tips. But you kind of control a little bit. It's more. I've always been more about like action equals results, right? So like I felt like if it was more in my control on how I could drive that equation, and I think that's why I took the gamble. And then eventually, when I became a server, it opened up a lot more options because the pay scale goes up. And it's funny to think about that. I still have dreams.
It's funny. I haven't talked about that job in probably 7 years, but what? It's funny because this all comes full circle because I was talking about this to one of my coaching clients this morning. In essence, you were betting on yourself, which is really what we want, right? And so, and I think I haven't done that enough in this life, and I think that's holding me back from capping my own expectations.
And I think you have to also be mindful of where you start and the habits you start creating at that stage, right? Because you don't know what's going to lead to. And like you said, the questions were large, huge exam. You pass it, you become a server, right? But then like you can just be a lazy person and just carry that out through the next stages of your life. And for me, it was always more like, well, just do the best you can at what you're doing right now, because you don't know what it's going to lead to. And then it led to being a server. I could have probably do different things there, but as we're gonna get into, I have bigger dreams than just staying at the cheese.
But something I want to talk about, because let's be honest, and I don't think there's any part about you that would deny this. Like, you wanted to be a musician, like that was your dream, right?
Right. And so the flexibility was the biggest thing I was looking for sure.
But what I want to harp on, and we'll get into your story, is that how hard was it for you to eventually put down that dream?
Oh man, it was really difficult. And I think in life, and this is a year where a lot of people are, some people are complaining, some people are just thriving. There's a mix of things going on in the world where like you could take sides, but I think the people that tend to do well in life and be happy are those that are basically able to adjust and adapt, right? And I'm going to throw some nuggets here and there as we go through, a little bit deeper. But I think where I'm going with is that, as things come your way, you have to take them as they are and decide like which outcome, you want to proceed, right? So an example is like, well, I wanted to be a musician, right? And things were going well, like for a while, things were going well, and it looked like, I could do that for
I can still sing all the songs in Spanish, just so you know. I cannot speak Spanish, but I can sing y'all's songs because I love the band so much.
Yeah, so just to give people a little bit of background, I used to be in a Spanish rock band, and I played with a lot of other musicians in town, and it was a great experience. I loved the music. I was the drummer, and I put a lot of time and effort into it. I think with everything I do, the constant is that I always prepare. I always try to study, try to learn from other people. So I went and did like a workshop in a really good college in Boston. And I got a coach in town, which is, I want to promote your business. It's the best you can do at any level of your life is to have people that can tell you, hey, you're doing the right thing, you're doing the wrong thing. And he helped me just basically work on my stuff. And I used to practice like 8 hours a day, like not kidding, bro. Like my hands will be bleeding. That was my sign I needed to stop, right? Mm-hmm. So as you know, when you're a drummer, mm-hmm. Your hands go through a beating. And then over the years, actually hit a rock bottom in 2009. This was like around the great financial crisis, which might be like a reminder of what we're going through today. And, I was looking to, one, go back to school. I wanted to get a day job, but something that would allow me to still play music. And I left my job at the Cheesecake Factory without having another job. I had gone on tour, came back, and then, dude, it took me months. I couldn't find a job for months. And that's when I realized the importance of financial knowledge, security, and planning. And, dude, it got to the point where my car got repossessed because months went by and my savings were just, going away. And someone in really close to me actually was the dad of the singer of my band who came to the rescue. And he just speaks about like God will put tests in your path but then he would also put people that would come to the rescue, right? So he gave me a loan. I was able to get my car back. Believe it or not, a couple months later, was able to get a job, 8 to 5, great balance, and started going back to school. And I was going at night, and I got to the point where I could go to either UT or go to other schools, and I chose to go to Texas State. At the time, I was thinking of going to study finance, like business in general, with a focus in finance, and I wanted to do something related to the music business, right? And then I go to my first, or it was like, come visit the school. You can do like a, sitting in the class, and I sit in this economics class, right? And then this guy afterwards is like, dude, yeah, like this is a great school. We have this program. You're giving money, you can invest in the markets. And I was like, I'm sold. I'm completely sold. And I think that's when I realized, like, I always had a passion for that. And I always had an interest in learning. I just didn't have the ability at the time to learn it. I didn't have the right tools to be able to grasp that type of material and apply it. And that's when the dream was starting to shift. And I said, well, like, I'm not quitting on the dream, but I'm like, if a different opportunity opens up, right, you have to be objective, right? Leave the emotions aside, right? And be objective. And for me, it was like, I want to be objective because this seems like a really good opportunity, right? I want to see what this can actually provide. And as much as it hurt at the time to just basically put that aside, it was the right decision to do. I would not take it back, like knowing now. And it's just because it provided knowledge, it provided experiences, and it's provided a good amount of, I guess you can call it, wealth for me to provide to my family. So I think in that sense, it was a great decision. Now, even if the decision would have been completely wrong, none of these things would have happened. It still felt like the right decision. The objective decision was for me to put that dream aside and focus on something different.
Yeah, and I think I deal with this a lot with young entrepreneurs. Is like, even after we visited on the mastermind, like, if you put Diego up against the wall, he's like, well, like, yeah, I love being an agent, but like, what I'm saying, guys, is like, you have to find the vehicle that gives you the best chance to succeed. Maybe it's not 100% your love, but it can provide the vehicle, the capital needed to create the other love. And I think too many times we as people hold on to the passion project, which is amazing. I believe in that, but you also have to have reality if you have a family or stuff like that. And so, I would imagine that once you started getting into the finance economic world, there was a lot of like falling in love with the process of that, understanding that maybe, once you create this life, maybe you go back to drumming eventually.
Yeah, there was always that thought, and there's still that thought. So my brother right now, he's actually trying to go study in Berkeley in Boston, which it was something that at the time was one of my dreams. And I think about it, I was like, hey, maybe I can just tap and go on tour with him, right? And maybe, who knows, if I have the financial freedom to do it, then that will be another way.
And what I want to focus on, because, I have so much respect for you and your wife, because your wife is a doctor. And, talk about how hard it was when you were working full time and going to college and still doing a little musician. Like, I'm sure there were some days where you wanted to give up, or like you were against the wall. How did you keep it all going?
Yeah, I think it's important to think about, like, the importance of discipline, right? And at the time, I think that's something that, like, I got to give thanks to my parents for that. I wasn't like the most disciplined kid, but they will always still tell me, like, hey, you got to work hard. You have to create good habits. And when you're busy, you have to be effective, right? So, like, if I'm going to work from 8 to 5 and to school from 7 to 9, and I still want to put in like an hour of music practice time, like, I have no time in between, right? And then on the weekends I'm playing. So over time you just get tired, but it just becomes a routine, right? And you just persist through the routine. Your discipline becomes what carries you forward, right? And I think that a lot of people just don't have that, and are not willing to create it, right? They think like, oh, I have a passion, and it's going to carry me through. He'll carry you through until you're like, man, I have no time. These sucks. I have to break down my drums at 4 a.m, put them in a bag, carry them to my car, and then I have to drive back an hour. You know what I mean? That's not fun. That's the sucky part of the job. But you have to think about like the bigger picture. It's like, that's part of the process. And yeah, for me, the biggest sacrifice is a lot of people might not know is that for several years, my wife and I, while we were dating, we were apart. She was trying to pursue her own dream to becoming a doctor, and I was always very supportive, and like I'm not going to be like, hey, do quit that for me. Like that's not pure love, in my opinion. If you care about the people that you love, you would push them towards their dream, not away. And yeah,
How
that took
far?
years.
Well, where were y'all at so people can get context?
Yeah, so she tried to she applied near Texas to become a doctor, to go to medical school, and it got to a point where things got difficult, like they do with any big dream, right? And she was ready to give up, and she's like, hey, like there's this program, it's in Mexico, it's tied to a school in the US, it would allow me to practice in the United States, but it's Mexico. And I'll be like, so like if that's the only route for you to get your dream, go. So yeah, that's 3 years plus 1 year in New York to do like the equivalent here. So we were apart for 4 years, right? And for me, it was like, well, if I'm going to be apart from this person for 4 years, I cannot just be like goofing around, right? Because this is time that we're really, putting aside that we're never going to get back. So I had to like basically go and like overload and be like, just give it 120%, because this time you could be spending with someone else, with the person you love in the same city. You're going to be apart. You better make the most of it and make it count. So yeah, it took 4 years. And then to top it off, after she was done, then she comes back to Texas, right? You will think like, oh, this is great. We're back, And then I get an internship in New York, at Goldman Sachs, right? After, I was about to graduate, I was planning on staying in Texas. And I was like, well, I have to try it, right? Because, this is Goldman Sachs. So I get an internship. I wasn't planning on moving to New York. And then that internship leads to a job. And I was like, oh, shit, like I gotta think about this. And I took the job. And that man, she was doing her residency. So she signed up basically for another 2 years or 3 years of that. And then that meant another 2 years apart. Basically, me now in New York and she's back in Texas, right? So it was like a huge sacrifice. Sometimes I think about whether it was worth it, right? Because, in hindsight, like it's time. Time is so precious that you will never get it back, right? So you have to think about those sacrifices. And obviously, things worked out in a way where, like, it's been able to provide to us as a family. But if they didn't, I would probably have reservations on whether it was the right decision to be apart. But you have to do that. You don't know. You got to sacrifice a lot if you want to accomplish great things.
But I also think if you look at it from, it's easy to say from sitting in this chair because you do both live in Austin now, and you're farther along in your careers. But if you were to inhibit the other person from being the best and full version of themselves, then the regret in the relationship would be there that y'all probably wouldn't last, right?
That's a great point. Yeah, I think that goes not just for a relationship, right? I think at the end of the day, you always have options, right? One option is to quit, right? And then another option is to keep going, right? So those are just very objective options. So you have to decide, like, well, I can just quit, right? But sometimes quitting, it stays there forever, like you just said, right? But then if you go and you keep going, right, you get that aside and you're like, well, at least I can get an answer. Is this going to work out? Well, if it didn't work out, what can I learn from it? And that's just the way you should approach every decision. Even though it could be an emotional decision, right? So like you could be emotional and be like, well, it hurts so much, like I'm going to cry every night. No, like you got to be objective. Like, are you willing to put yourself through that?
As much as we talk, we haven't talked about this. You're from Venezuela. You started off as a busboy. You were a waiter. What was the emotion when you rolled into New York at an internship for Goldman Sachs?
Dude, I mean, listen, everyone has feelings, right? I think that in the markets, I've learned how to control emotions the better I can, because we tend to be driven by fear and greed, right? Those are the two most powerful emotions a human will always face: fear and greed. Fear is like you can see it this year. Like, I don't have to give you too many examples, but greed is a big one, right? When you come from bussing tables, cleaning somebody's tables, from going to like, dude, you got to realize I didn't speak English when I got here. So just start there. Then now I'm at Goldman Sachs, and the greed just went really high, like to the max. Like I'm like, oh, like I was like, no, I'm just coming here to learn. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, maybe I can do this. Maybe I'll be the next hedge fund hot star and whatnot. And it starts getting to your head, and you start doing unquestionable decisions, and you feel like you're on top of the world. And you have to control those emotions, because if you don't control those emotions, they will control you, right? And you start basically now thinking that you know more than you really do. And that's a dangerous proposition, right? When you start thinking that you know something, that's the problem. You're better off not knowing anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or thinking that you don't know anything. And that was a realization for me, that I was like, you know what? I maybe need to take a step back, and I need to like think about like, what I want to do going forward. Now it led to a job. I almost didn't take it. Obviously, part of the decision, we were going to be apart for a couple more years, me and my wife, and at that time, it just seemed like the right way to do it. Like, go. This is one of the most reputable banks in the world. Just get the experience, and then the long-term goal was to come back to Texas and have our family here. And but during that time, my mind changed so many times, right? Like I tried to stay in New York. So it was a unique experience overall, but I'm glad I did it.
And so I guess we'll take it to this part of the story. So you're both living in New Jersey at the time for how long?
So we were there for a couple of years together,
Okay.
right?
And then what started the thought process to move back to Texas?
So this is funny, because even though like I knew long term I wanted to come back to Texas, I always felt like, I wanted to see how far I could go in the New York area, right? Like in the financial, capital of the world. So I was actually pursuing this certification called the Chartered Financial Analyst, or CFA, which is the gold standard in the investment industry. One of the hardest things I've ever done. And I just passed the last level. And this basically just shows mastery in investments. And I was ready to get like an investment job. I'll apply at hedge funds. I'd apply internally at Goldman Sachs for like different opportunities. And I'm not going to lie, I think I interviewed more than 100 times to get a job in the industry and managing money, right? Like I was working in at Goldman more as a risk management type of role, and I wanted to actually be making investment decisions. And I think I had maybe a round that I had 20 interviews, and it got through the very end, me and some other dude, and they're like, well, you did great, but this guy went to Harvard. And I'm like, oh, that's great. Okay. All right, thanks. Next.
Right. Yeah.
And I went through so many that I had to take a step back, and I'm like, let's just plan it out. What happens? What's the worst that could happen? You don't get a job. Are you gonna keep trying? Like similar to what you spoke about earlier, like, changing direction. And I was like, what's the end goal here? The end goal was to come back to Texas. Okay, well, why aren't you looking in Texas, right? So I started like mapping out like potential places where I could perform these type of duties. And it just happens that summer I had a mentee. He was interning that year, and he kept talking about UTIMCO. He's spent all his career there, and he's like, oh, UTIMCO. He was going to UT, And he's like, yeah, he's a fixed income portfolio manager, loves it. And I was like, okay, well, let me look into UTIMCO. And they
So
had
explain. So you're using the short version. Tell people what it actually is, so they understand.
so UTIMCO is basically it's a company that was created by the University of Texas and Texas A&M to manage a pool of money. Some of the money comes from a gift that was granted in the early 1900s that basically became oil, and now it's like worth over 20 billions.
How much does the fund manage?
So we manage roughly $50 billion right now.
50
So
billion. Guys, you heard that? 50 billion.
we're the second largest in the United States, I think in the world, only behind Harvard. And we should be on pace to pass and become the largest endowment. And basically, UTIMCO stands for the University of Texas and Texas A&M Investment Management Company.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's funny that this happened because the way I got started into investment management was by managing money for the school I went to. So to me, these represented an opportunity to do something that, it's how I got started. So when I met these young men who introduced me to UTIMCO, I immediately looked into the opportunities that they had, and they actually happened to have a role covering public markets, which is something that I wanted to do. So we have basically private investments, real estate investments, and then we have this private public section where we invest, in both equities and fixed income. And I actually interviewed with his dad, and he's one of the persons I work with now, and that led to this job. And the funny thing is that as I look back, one of the reasons I went to Texas State was because they had this endowment fund that was managed by students. And it was like a complete full circle, and it had a purpose, right? The students manage the money. If you make a return, that goes to like scholarships, to the professors, to like the research for the professors. So our mission at UTIMCO, it's to basically be able to provide for future education, right? For future scholarships, research. And one of the institutions that we support is MD Anderson, the Cancer Center in Houston. So we're not only investing to help with education, we are helping figure out how to cure cancer. Imagine if 10 years from now, hopefully, or 5, hopefully next year, we cure cancer, right? And you know that you had a little piece to play into that. How fulfillful would that be?
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't that be amazing? So to me, that mission was like one of the reasons I also wanted to come, because it was like investing with a purpose. It wasn't just investing for the bottom line, right? Because for greed, it was investing for a purpose.
And I'll also say this to any of you that are fair-skinned, like I am, Anglo-Saxon. If you weren't familiar with, his wife is Hispanic, and family's kind of a big deal in the Hispanic community. So I would imagine once you found out that you were pregnant, the in-laws were clamoring for y'all to get back to Texas too.
Oh yeah, of course. Like my wife's from San Antonio, so Austin is like the closest. We're like south of Austin, and it's like, yeah, we'll take that.
So it's kind of like what made you, Austin, what made you who you are is rebirthing this new opportunity in your career. It's kind of like you said, it's a full circle opportunity.
It is a full circle. And the funny part of it is that, when things are happening to you, you don't know what lies ahead. So 2020, right? You could be like, well, like next year might be the same. Yeah, it might be, maybe not, right? But you just got to stick to it because you don't know what's coming. And we actually, that year in 2016, when I got this job, we were trying to start a family. And months went by, and we're like, well, maybe it might take later, So she got pregnant in December. We drove down. She was pregnant. My son was meant to be born in Austin, right? So he was conceived in New York or New Jersey, and then he was born in Austin. So, things were meant to be. And then now, we've been very blessed to, build this house and continue to your family.
And how much does your sector of your company manage total?
So the public area is about 20 billion, a little over 20. Yeah.
Okay.
So 15 is in public equities and 5 is in
And we've had conversations on multiple levels. How do you keep your not your mind's focused, but how do you keep your emotions in check when we're not investing 20, 15 grand, we're investing 320, $10 million. Do you just get so comfortable in that space that you basically have to go on facts and not emotion?
Well, I think, you have to leave the emotions aside. So there's many fields in the financial markets, of one being behavioral economics or behavioral finance, and there's all the people that have actually approached the topic without being specialists in the subject. And like, I'm going to quote a few. Warren Buffett very famously said, "Rule number one of investing is to never lose money." Now that doesn't seem, never is very unachievable, right? And then the rule number two is never forget rule number one, right? So you're gonna lose, right? It's just part of the markets, right? There's volatility. It's just how you lose that matters, right? So another very famous investor, his name is Paul Tudor Jones, said it a little bit differently. He actually said, "Don't focus on making money. Focus on protecting what you already have," right? So you have to obviously use facts, statistics, and look at the probabilities. You say, well, there's a 80% chance that this might go right and a 20% chance this might go wrong, right? So accordingly, you have to think about, like, well, am I willing to take that 20%, right? That chance of that not going the way I want it to. And sometimes that 20% might be wrong. It might be a higher probability. So you have to always be thinking, where am I wrong, right? And you have to look at everything. You have to think about, like, well, if this happened, what would I do if this happened? So to your point, you don't have time to look at the emotions because you already have a process in place.
And we talk about a real estate investing a lot. If you're talking to an investor of real estate, maybe obviously on a smaller scale, but what can they take away from what you've learned when they're looking at real estate to invest? What would you tell them? Because I know that half of your job is to mitigate risk. So you have a different view on some things. I'd just be curious what you would say to them.
Well, I think the first thing you have to understand is, like, what's your value proposition, right? So are you good at identifying properties with certain conditions, fixing them and selling them? Are you good at identifying companies that have very poor cash flows and making those cash flows larger, right? Or are you simply really good at being the middleman, finding something and reselling it? I think you guys call it wholesaling, right? So you have to figure out what it is that you do best. One of the best ways to think about this is that it's not really hard. You got to do a few things right and just avoid large mistakes. That's really the bottom line. Like, you're saying, well, if I'm really good at Airbnb, I'm gonna use that as an example, right? Because you did that, you've done that for quite some time. If that's your value proposition, right, and you've realized that's something that you've done right, spend more time on that, right? Don't spend more time trying to become something that you're not, right? Because what happens is that once you start going the other direction and not being true to the things that you know really well, that's when you start making mistakes. You can try it, but just try it at a small scale, right? Mm-hmm. So in our world, we call that sizing, right? So if I'm going to buy Tesla, right, I'm going to use that because it's something everybody, it's pretty aware. I think the company was up like 600%, like in 6 months, right? And I could say, well, Tesla looks like a good investment, right? But I could be wrong. What am I comfortable, right, investing in Tesla? Do I want to do a 1% position, a 10, or a 30% position, or do I want to put all my money there, right? So earlier this year, the company was supposed to get into the S&P 500, and it didn't. I think it lost like 15% in one day. It was like a really large sell-off, right? Are you willing to tolerate that risk, right? So that's what I mean by that. Like, focus on things you do well, right? And size those things accordingly, right? Make sure that that's where you put in most of your eggs. And then the other things, right? Make sure that like, you test them first, right? Because if you don't know them well, you're going to lose more money. You're going to you're going to pay a higher fee, right? To learn by going somewhere where you have very limited information or limited ability.
It's what my mentors told me and what I have a tendency to do, especially in my 20s. You spend your whole life being really good at something and learning it. And the moment that you're actually poised to make some money is the time that you take your focus off of it. I think people do that
right.
all the time.
And that happens all the time, right? You have a thesis, right? You do all the work and you're like, I think XYZ is going to go up, it's going to double. And then you're like, I'm going all in, right? And then the moment that the market turns against you, you're like, I'm out, right? And then you just turn your attention to something else. I'm like, no, it might be just a small sell-off and it might bounce back, right? So you have to understand, the supply and demand of the markets. You have to understand the financial size. Is it a stable company? Is the move expected? So you have to really be prepared, right? So that you don't leave something before it materializes, right? And I think that's what you're speaking about. Like, don't just quit.
I mean, to pertain it to real estate, right? My buddy who runs $1 billion private equity fund for developers yesterday posted that in the top 20 markets, so how they judge real estate for new construction is starts, right? In the top 10%, in the top 10 for this last year, Texas, every state is in the top 7. So what does that tell me, right? It tells me that Texas is on fire, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that, using data is the best way to start to get an edge, right? So I always say that the goal is to turn data into information into insight. And that's kind of what you're basically doing there. So you're turning some data into information, right? So that you can generate that insight. And that's how you're going to basically move forward. So it's not hard. I think people make more investing more difficult than it should be, right? The bottom line is like you're going to get paid, right, for your capital. That's what an investor does. You're basically getting paid for your capital, right, and for the premiums that you're willing to tolerate. So if you're a private investor in a real estate deal, right, and you're putting capital to work, you're getting paid for the fact that you cannot get your money out. That's one of the premiums that you should be getting paid for. The duration that your money is going to be looked up, right? So not just the fact that you cannot take it out whenever, but also like, is this a 10-year lockup or is this a 1-year lockup, right? So that duration matters too, right? And then what's the alternative? That's the other part that people forget. It's like, yeah, great. Like I'm going to invest in real estate, which let's say it yields 10%. But like if you have another opportunity with equal or similar risk that's yielding 12%, will you still take that, right? So I think that's one of the misconceptions. Like fear and greed, manage those two. Manage your sizing, making sure your bets are spread out, right? And then the other one, it's like, be able to compare opportunities across.
No, and I agree. And what I want you to speak on now, because I think we just had this conversation the other day, and it's super important, and try to keep it as basic as possible. The financial literacy of America is piss poor at best, would be the easiest, the cleanest way to say it. What do you think about money? A couple of points that people don't know about the most. What do you see the most that people miss?
I think the biggest point is what money really is. Money is actually nothing, right? Money is the value that you place into something, right? So if you go back in time and you do a history of money, right? We used to say that, well, gold was money, right? Before that, it used to be like, well, I'm really good at making bread and you're really good at making sausage, right? So I'm going to trade my bread for your sausage. So half of my bread equals one of your sausages. That's the definition of money, right? So that was one of the first origins. And then you go from there and then you start now, we need everybody, like not everybody makes bread. So you need a form of currency, right? that everybody can use, right? And I'm going to use Bitcoin right now because it's increasing in value and increasing in acceptance. And some people are starting to think, is it really a form of money? Is it really a valuable currency? Um, and and the bottom line is that yes, it is. If people are willing to use Bitcoin, right, to transact, to exchange it for a different type of currency, that's what it is. The problem is that what we put value to, it's all in our imagination, or it's somebody puts the value in it, right? And that's the biggest misconception. You could go to a house and say, well, this house is worth $10. All right, good. Then you go to the house next door and it's worth 20. Who says it's worth 20, right? So that's where economics comes in and say, well, you have supply and you have demand. If more people want that house, it's supposed to be worth more, right? And I feel like in real estate specifically, that's where people can really have an advantage, be able to value, be able to look at something and say, well, is this really worth what people say it is worth? So we put worth into material things, right? So people tend to value houses, cars, all these material things that are worth X, Y, Z. But then, like, there's all the other things that don't have a precise value, like emotions, feelings, and experiences. So those are more abstract and harder to value. So I think that that's the biggest misconception. What is worth what, and how can you actually get an edge, right, in that part? Like,
if you, and I know you and Ryan, who's been on the show, have extremely different investing strategies, and we're going to get into your marathon running and the Ironmans, which I want to talk about for sure. But for all my listeners, people that just invest in real estate, which you're happy to do as well, you invested in your house, give them a 1 to 3 point plan that you view the best way to create long-term wealth, or let's say a 5-year plan.
Yeah, I obviously, and I think Ryan, it's a bit. I think we're talking about Ryan Breedwell, who's a financial advisor, right? So, the biggest thing that you gotta imagine is that everyone talks about the X, right? So you have the X and how you spread them out. We call that diversification, right? Now, there's two trains of thoughts here. There's people that think that you diversify, right, because you lower your risk that way. And then there's the entrepreneur mindset, right, or in your case, the people that only focus on one strategy, that think like, well, if I'm good at this, let me just do this, right, which is what I spoke about earlier. That's good when you're starting out, right? When you're beginning to get something going, right? Because you need capital to invest. That's the bottom line. But once you have some capital, right, you want to make sure that you lower your risk, and diversification is the way you do that, right? So if I'm an investor in equities, right, so the stock market, I can diversify my risk by buying fixed income or bonds, right, or commodities, things like gold or precious metals. So even oil. So those are ways to diversify. And then real estate, right? So real estate tends to be it's more sensitive to interest rates, so it will have lower correlation than just pure stocks. But then people only do 2 asset classes. You have to be open-minded to have a diversified portfolio. Now, you have to have a long-term horizon. That's how you really create wealth. And by that, I mean, you cannot be investing for a month, 2 months, 3 months, or a year. You have to have a multi-year horizon. The best example of this is Warren Buffett, right? He started in his teen years, but he didn't really become a billionaire until he was like 50 or 60, right? And a lot of that is because of compounding, right? So if you Google it, compounding is one of the most amazing things you could ever find. That means that $1 today compounded 10% in a year is worth, right, $1.10. And then now that compounds again, and now you're just basically increasing that at a faster pace, an exponentially faster pace. So in 10 years, it just becomes a much bigger piece that if you would have just put one and then take it out, and then put another one and take it out. So I think that's the other part. You have to have your money working over long periods of time so that the compounding can actually work its magic. So there's lots of books out there that they touch on the topic, and they do a great job. So my biggest thing is to encourage everyone to just educate yourself, make sure that you understand all these different terminologies, and never settle. Keep learning. I think learning is like, for an investor, you should always be thinking, where am I wrong? That should be the first thing you should always ask yourself. Where am I wrong? Right? What could go wrong? And not just as an investor, I think as a person too. Where are you wrong? Right? What could go wrong? What am I not seeing that other people might be seeing?
And I think something that's super important. I love the book Profit First because it's basically like if you basically, as an investor, let's say that you're making $20,000 a flip. Let's just say, if you were to take $3,000 to $2,000 out that you never saw, and you were to do that 70 times over, and then that money was making money, then you would wake up in 5 years and that money that you never knew about would be this much amount. And I think we're too quick. It's almost like Lord of the Rings with Gollum, with our cash, which cash is important. But if you remove it from your psyche and you hand it to a money manager, or you put it in an index fund, or you put it in a mutual fund, then you can almost create this second avenue of cash making money for yourself, but still have the money to operate your business. I think we're so quick to, because you know what it is? We're quick to say what the cash means to us for our identity, instead of letting the cash do what it needs to do, which is make money for itself.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to the greed factor. Everything, I'm telling you, everything can be decomposed into fear and greed. And most often than not is greed, if it's like related to money. Mm-hmm. So 100%. Yeah, people just want that extra money, or just that extra confidence of being able to say like, oh, I make X, Y, Z. And
so. Exactly. But what I want to talk about in the last couple of minutes here is what you've got out of what we love to do, which is cycle. And really, you do marathons, you do other stuff. You know, what has that done for you, and kind of what got you started on that kick?
Well, what got me started is that I was actually really out of shape. And my sister at the time was actually doing half marathons. That's really, I mean, I've always been into sports. I mean, my original dream was to become an athlete, professional athlete. Grew up playing baseball, basketball, everything. And I've always been, pretty active. But then, like, this was right around the time I was finishing college, and my sister was running a half marathon, and she's like, "Oh, I'm the new athlete on the family. There's one thing you don't do, and I always call it, don't poke the bear. Like, do not challenge me, because I'm so competitive sometimes that I would do anything to prove you're wrong." And I don't know, it just started that kind of like, that feeling of like, okay, well, it's just running. It shouldn't be that hard, right? Little did I know. And then my wife was like, "Oh, you know what? I want to do a Spartan race. That looks like fun." And I was like, "You know what? It does look like fun." If you don't know what a Spartan race is, it's basically an obstacle course theme after the Spartan life in the Greeks. Like, if you've seen the movie 300, you'll relate. And we did it, and she did better than I did, and which is, I mean, I'm competitive, but it was fine. But dude, I was throwing up. It was a short race, and I was throwing up. I couldn't do the obstacles. I just couldn't do it. And I think that just basically started like an inner fire. And I was just like, okay, I got to do it again. I got to do better. I got to do better. So I looked up as soon as I finished, when's the next race? I got to do the next race. And then the next race we signed up was a half marathon, right? Which is what my sister had done. And I did that, and I, got in better shape, did okay, but I was like still not happy with it. And then I was like, you know what? I'm not going to just settle for a half marathon. I'm going to do a marathon, right? So then it became the quest of doing a marathon. And I didn't want to just do any marathon. I wanted to do the biggest marathon in the world. So I did the New York City Marathon. And then at this time, I'm like, well, it's just, it's a marathon. Like, like you train, but it's just running. Dude, I cramped so many times during that marathon. Like, I almost had to be carried to the finish line because I just kept cramping. And I guess where I'm going with the story is that, those are obstacles, right? So at the end of the day, you can relate that to a challenge in life. whenever you're going through something and you get a cramp, that's like basically getting an obstacle, a physical obstacle. And the Spartan race obstacles, similarly, right? Those are also physical obstacles. So I want to use the word addicted, although I don't like using that word, but I just got really into, the feeling that I got from overcoming these obstacles, right? And how to better myself. So you had a objective measure of how you improve, which is time, right? If you did something in 2 hours and you now did it in an hour and 58 minutes, that's a 2-minute improvement, objective, right? If you fail five obstacles and now you just basically fail 4, that's an objective improvement. And I just kept on, and I just took that to other areas of my life. I was studying for a test, I had the same mentality. I was like looking for a job, as I mentioned earlier, and I just kept getting rejected. Use the same mentality. And I just took it a step further each time, right? Every time a step further, right? Either faster or just more challenging. So a marathon became a half Ironman, and the 3-mile Spartan race became a 5-mile, and then it became a 13-mile. The highest peak, the highest mountain, you have to always push yourself. You have that mentality, it will always translate to other areas of your life. I think that's why I keep doing it. And I've gotten so many lessons in life through it. And I just think like it just prepares you mentally, right?
Yeah.
Because mentality is so big. People don't realize that mental strength is a big part of the battle on anything you do in life, right? And then physical, it's just basically a component of mental. So, there you do both, and you're already pretty much up there.
I couldn't agree more. But I almost got off the podcast and didn't talk about it because you're going through it right now. And I know it's still fresh, but there's been some changes. And guys, the reason I want to bring this up is because Andres is a high performer. His wife is a doctor. He manages a ton of money. But there's always been something that maybe there was this little part of your life that I've been holding you accountable for, and we're on day 31, right? Correct?
31, yeah.
Day 31, and talk about the shift, because I think anybody that has kids, this will hit home hard.
Yeah, and I think it started last year. I started meditating last year, right? So my birthday's coming up, and every year I try to make sure that I get ahead of the New Year's. Everybody wants to do New Year's resolutions. I gave up on those a while back, because it's just pointless. Do it whenever you feel like doing it. And I think it started. I was going through a rough patch a year ago, and I encourage everyone to look up this book called "The Obstacle Is the Way" by Ryan Holiday. And it's based on Stoic philosophy. But one of the things that kind of started the journey is that one was about meditation, right? So I started meditating a year ago. Actually, I just hit a year of doing it. And that kind of cleared my mind. I was getting very emotional, which as you can tell, I don't like emotions that much anymore. And it was translating into my son. I have a 3-year-old, a toddler who throws a lot of tantrums, and sometimes it can be tough. So meditation turned into, okay, what else is there on this philosophy? And one was waking up early, right? So if you look into how the Stoic philosophers lived their life, one of the first things they did was that they woke up before the sun would come up, sunrise. And they would take this time to, 1, meditate, 2, right, to just enjoy the silence. And then 3 will be to just basically get ahead of the things that matter for you. And for me, it was like, well, I want to do all these different things because, like you said, I'm trying to be the best version of myself. But I also have this son who I want to give all the attention to. And every time I didn't get to these things, I would always be in a bad mood, right? And it was basically, I will always feel guilty spending time with my son. So I'm like, I'm just going to wake up early, try to get all these things that matter to me so that then I can give 100% of my attention to my son, right? And this is the importance of having someone to be accountable for, because I saw you posting every morning. I'm up, I'm working out, I'm doing whatever. And I was like, well, he's already up. I need somebody to hold me accountable. So I'm not going to disrupt your life. So I just hit you up and I say, hey, man, I'm trying to do this. I've tried for years. It's not like I just woke up. I've been trying for years. But I'm like, what's missing in my desire to change this behavior? And it was like, I need somebody to hold me accountable, right? So if you don't need a coach, it might not be just because you're, great already, but sometimes you need someone to just hold you accountable, because sometimes things would happen and you need that person to say, hey man, like, are you up? Like, are you sliding? And the best of the best, they always have coaches. They always have mentors. They have people to hold them accountable. And you've been that for me. I think about it. I'm like, well, I'm going to text you because I have to. And I think I forgot one day that you had to remind me. You're like, yo, are you up? So it became easier for me to do it, having someone that could just basically, hit me up and say, yo, you need to do this because this is why you need to do it. And having the why is a big part of it, right? If you don't have a why, it's going to be difficult for you to carry on with anything.
And so you've done it 31 days in a row, 4 a.m. You've gotten up. But what I want to hit home with everybody, and we'll wrap it up here. What have you seen in your son? What have you seen in yourself just in that time that has, yeah.
Dude, first of all, the first week, it was amazing because I would just shut down. My son gets here usually around 5:30. Now I'm working from home, so I don't have a commute. So when he comes home, I try to wrap up as much as I can. And then I started playing with him, like something that like I was always checking my phone or trying to answer emails. And I started playing with him. And then day one was kind of like, okay, just, day two, he came to me and wanted to play. Day three, he's like, hey, let's go. Like he wanted my attention. He saw that he could get more of my attention. And I saw that and he kept feeding me. And I was like, oh, I need more of this. This is what I need to do. Not only that, I got more productive in the mornings, right? Because now if I wanted to exercise, I already did it. If I wanted to, like right now, I'm studying for another certification. I already did that, right? So by the time they're up, I'm usually like 2 hours in, right? So I can already put things aside and give them my attention. And I just feel more light. Like I feel like a big weight just got off my shoulders, and I can be more present. I think that's the right word.
I think it was interesting, right? Because at this moment I'm doing 75 hard, and for me, like adding the Saturdays and Sundays workouts is a little different for me. That's obviously something that's added on. I was already eating well. I don't drink already, but what I do know is I know myself. And let me tell you something, because I was a bartender for 20 years. At 4:30, this guy wants to wrap up his day. This guy, I want to be done. My brain is fried. So what I've done is I do both workouts in the morning and I read in the morning. Having that done just allows you to explode into your day. You've already accomplished so much before 6:30 that it really gives you the empowerment to just go destroy the day. And I know that the amount of time that you're getting to spend to study and the new avenues you're getting to expose are really adding to adding to your repertoire. And I would imagine that this might be something that you keep going on for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I now see the benefits, and when you see the benefits of something, it's hard for you to turn back. Like if you know better, you do better. It's when you don't know, right, that you basically make mistakes. But if you know better, you do better, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just since we're wrapping it up, I just want to basically, we're dealing with really challenging times. This year has been rough for a lot of people, and myself included in multiple areas of my life. So I just want to basically, all your listeners, man, just tell them like no one grows in their comfort zones, right? Your mindset determines how you respond to it. And some people actually, they thrive under stress. If you are one of those people, you're doing great this year, right? If you're not one of those people, then focus, right, on making sure you become one of those people. At the end of the day, and I mentioned the book, please, I'm not trying to promote it. I'm just saying it really helped me before the pandemic, right? So it was one of the tools I had before the pandemic. It's called The Obstacle's the Way, given to me by one of my mentors. And basically it opens with this. It says, there's no good or bad without us, right? There's only perception. There's the event itself, called it COVID, and the story we tell ourselves about what it means. And then I'm going to take it a step further from Marcus Aurelius, who's a big philosopher, former king. Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harm. Don't feel harm, and you haven't been. And with that, I will close it, because that's probably the best way I can close this on a year like this. Just choose not to feel harm. Take the best of this year, the worst of this year, learn from it, and make the next year the best year of your life, starting today.
Perception is reality. And at the end of the day, I do believe that New Year's resolutions are the stupidest thing on the planet, because if you wanted to get healthy, you would get healthy today. But you have to look at yourself in the mirror. You have to listen to those quotes he just said, and then you have to destroy the limiting beliefs and the stories that you're telling yourself that are holding you back from the best version of yourself. It's as simple as that. And dude, I can't thank you enough. I had the best time ever. I'm not even going to finish. I don't even say anything else because that finish was killer. So thank you, my brother. And make sure you share this with your friends, guys.
Always here, buddy, whenever you need me. Next time we'll do a investing masterclass.
No, we're going to do it because I'm starting a group coaching group, and I'm going to have you speak to.
Thank you for listening to Construct Your Life with Austin Linney. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, subscribe, and pay it forward by sharing with a friend. Most importantly, take this opportunity to start constructing your life by taking immediate action on what you learned. For show notes, resources, and more information on one-on-one coaching with Austin, visit constructyourlifepodcast.com.